concentrations. Many of you may have heard the reference to hiding the decline from the CRU email scandal. I will use a nice graphic from the Daily Mail Online to illustrate an example of one such obfuscation. The chart in question actually takes advantage of two graphical tricks to exaggerate the hockey stick shape of the curve and hide data that does not support the author's conclusions. The top chart shows three proxy series, including one by Michael Mann and one by Keith Briffa, as they were reported on the cover of a key climate report. The three proxy series are in pink, green, and blue, and the instrumental temperature record is overlaid in red. The first trick is the big uptick in the hockey stick does not come from the proxy data, but from the overlaid instrumental data. Sure, these two data sources seem to match really closely between 1900 and 1950, but that is because they are forced to match by their authors. This is the calibration period where the proxy series coefficients are set. However, once the calibration period is over, one can see the instrumental records and the proxy series values immediately diverge. The best analogy I can offer is that the proxies are a dog on a leash until 1950, so it is no surprise they stay close to their master. But the real test is what happens when the leash is taken off, and in the case of the proxy series, they quickly wander far away. The proxies don't show a steep decline during 1950 to 2000 supposedly anthropogenic period. This does not mean, of course, that temperatures have not risen over the last 50 years just because the tree rings say they have not. The point, however, is that if the proxies are not following the current uptick in temperature, then they may well not have followed upticks in the past, casting doubt on the conclusion that the proxies somehow prove temperatures have been flat and stable for 1,000 years. Again, further evidence that trees make bad thermometers. The second trick is perhaps more blatant and less ethical, and is illustrated on the lower right. For a reason never explained in any document in which this chart was included, the green line, Keith Briffa's series, was cut off around 1960. The reconstructed Briffa data above shows that this was pretty clearly done to hide a sharp decline in the proxy data. Again, the proxy data should closely follow actual temperatures up to about 1950, as this was the period that they're on the leash. But once let off the leash, they quickly go into the exact opposite direction as the instrumental record. While this may in part be because the instrumental record is exaggerated in some of the ways we discussed previously, the main reason for this is again that the tree rings and other such data series do not appear to be very reliable proxies for temperature. If they fail so miserably in measuring temperatures that we have a pretty good handle on today, how can we trust them to be correct for temperatures in 1400? And this is the problem that scientists were trying to hide. I probably have already taken more time than I should on these reconstructions, but I can't resist one more example, again from Michael Mann, this time from more recent study. Here is a proxy series based on layers of lake settlements in Finland. This is how the proxy works. In warmer years, more things grow, and more organic matter can be found in a particular layer of sediment. This organic matter reduces the density of the sediment, so the lower the density of the year's layer, the higher the organic matter, and therefore the higher the implied temperature. In this series you can see a medieval warm period in yellow with some crazy cold data for the last 100 years. We might expect from an initial inspection of the data that unless there is something climatically anomalous about Finland, this might not be very good proxy data. And in fact, the researchers who originally gathered this data determined that the last 100 years of data were probably corrupted by man-made agriculture, deforestation, and disturbance of the sediments over the last century. In other words, the last 100 years of data were meaningless. So enter Michael Mann. Climatologists putting together these studies claim that they do not cherry-pick the proxy series that give the answer they want, but the fact is that despite there being well over 1,000 proxy series from various studies, the same 20 or 30 get used over and over again, and what these have in common is that they reliably produce hockey stick results. When Mann approached these Tiljander settlement series, he did two things. First, he kept the data known to be corrupted from the last century. And then his algorithm flipped the chart upside down and used the proxy in reverse. So now he has a series with a medieval cool period and an incredible hockey stick shaped warming in the last century. He basically used this upside down Tiljander sediments 4 times to create his newest hockey stick. If you leave these 4 series out of the numbers, and if you remove some strip bark bristlecone pine tree rings from Southern California that are hotly contested as a reliable proxy, the hockey stick, which is shown on the left in his original analysis, goes away on the right. In fact, you get a chart very similar to the one we started with, showing a medieval warm period and a little ice age, and temperatures today any higher than they were in the Middle Ages. So a combination of cherry-picking, questionable statistical practices, and outright data abuse produce hockey sticks. Several folks have tried to step back from the Mann hockey team approach and to use a more fair selection of less controversial proxies. Two such researchers are Moberg, who is generally considered a strong global warming supporter, and Lowell, who is more of a skeptic. And lo and behold, it comes right back to where we started. We get the medieval warm period around 1000, we get a little ice age, and the temperature today is similar or even lower than those in the Middle Ages. So we're right back to where we were 20 years ago after a little 10-year diversion via the hockey stick. One last note, here in the Phoenix area is a Center for the Study of Carbon Dioxide and Global Change. They have a project where they catalog all the published proxy series, asking a simple question. Does the proxy show temperatures in the Middle Ages higher or lower than today, and by how much? We can see that the vast majority of these published proxies show that the medieval warm period was warmer than it is today by about 1 degree Fahrenheit. So much for the proxy studies as a proof of strong relationship between CO2 and warming. That's 2 down. Which brings us to the third argument for high climate sensitivity to CO2. Remember again that we are not talking about proof of CO2's ability to act as a greenhouse gas. We know that it acts as a greenhouse gas in the laboratory, and we know that in a meta sense that greenhouse gases warm the Earth. What we don't know is the amount of warming that results from incremental increases in CO2 concentration. Is it large or small? The third argument that the warming can be large from even small changes in concentration of CO2 comes from the IPCC fourth report and is really the dominant current argument for high sensitivities. As you may know, scientists have built computer models to try to evaluate the behavior of Earth's climate. None of these models even come close to modeling the complexities of the actual climate system. For example, most are unable to explain multi-decadal ocean cycles, much less longer-term climate cycles such as the descent into and out of the Little Ice Age. Nevertheless, climate scientists use their models to try to duplicate the actual temperature history of the last 15 years, and unsurprisingly, they failed to do so. Flawed models weren't able to reproduce past temperatures. Now, I might have said this leads to the conclusion that we don't have a good understanding of the climate and that our models are simplistic and flawed. However, climate scientists concluded something entirely different. They said, because our models can't duplicate the increases in global warming over the last 50 years of history, then these increases must be due to non-natural factors, i.e. due to CO2. The temperature increases since 1950, by their reckoning, couldn't have been natural because our climate models that are supposedly based on nature can't reproduce them. In effect, the entire theory that most of the late 20th century warming is caused by man-made CO2 is based on the deep scientific finding that, well, we can't think of anything else it could be. Dr. Richard Lindzen of MIT has a great quote, which I'll share in total. What was done was to take a large number of models that could not reasonably simulate known patterns of natural behavior, and he lists a number of ocean cycles, for example, claim that such models nonetheless accurately depict natural internal climate variability, and use the fact that these models could not replicate the warming episode from the mid-70s to the mid-90s to argue that forcing was necessary and that the forcings must have been due to man. Here's an illustration in graphical form of the logic from the fourth IPCC assessment. The black line is a highly smooth temperature history of the last 100 years, though exaggerated because they chose the peak year in 1998 as their endpoint. The blue band is what their models tell them would have happened without anthropogenic or man-made effects. As you can see, the models apparently projected that Earth would have cooled over the last 50 years without increased CO2 from man. The pink band is the output from their models after assumptions from CO2 increases are added. The conclusion they draw is that because the models are unable to match history considering only natural effects, but can emulate history when they include CO2, then CO2 must be causing the warming. I don't know how many of you are actually familiar with computer modeling, perhaps in the financial world, but this is incredible hubris. Give me a few hours and I can force any model to match history, to actually bet real money that such model results are correct in the future just because we have tweaked the model to match history as madness, a sure way to bankruptcy, which, come to think of it, we've seen quite a fair share of on Wall Street recently. Just to be specific, here's the temperature history we've been using. We've been talking about the IPCC's claim that it is impossible to explain temperature increases since 1950 by natural factors alone. But since temperatures were flat for the early part of this period, what we really mean is that climate scientists believe it is impossible to explain temperature increase from 1975 to 1998 by natural factors alone. This is the area I have circled in the chart, which we might call the so-called anthropogenic period.